I'm John Onwachekwa, one of the pastors here at Cornerstone Church in the West End of Atlanta. Man, we really didn't set out to plant a church here in the West End, so it was very kind of reactive. 5 years ago, we just had a group of folks who were a part of a church plant closer to downtown that found themselves in transition, and they felt like we really have a heart to plant the gospel in a place where it seems like people are living comparably harder lives from an external standpoint. So folks, they live these hard lives and they're accustomed to hearing bad news on the daily. Let's all plant roots and set up and share the good news of the gospel, not just with words, not just through a church service, but through our lives. Their goal was, we're just gonna be explicitly Christian, so we're not gonna hide the fact that we're Christian. We're not gonna try to do this bait and switch, but at the same time, we're gonna be intentionally relational. So we're just gonna show folks that we're here and we wanna fold our lives into the fabric of this community. And what transpired through the course of a short time, I mean a few years, was it worked. They came in and they loved West End well, but more than that, I think the group of people loved one another well. So much so that folks that weren't part of this group, who had a disdain for Jesus and Christianity and the church, they'd look at this group and they would say things like, I've never been a fan of Jesus or Christianity or the church. There's just been all of this stuff that's come with it, but there's something about the way that y'all love each other that makes me feel like I want to be a part of that. And they'd say things like, I think if y'all had a church here, I think that we'd come. And that was what led us to sit and talk and to say, maybe we need to start a church here. Early on, one of the best pieces of advice that I got was, the team that you play with is more important than the field that you play on. So if you're with the right people, the places that you go, it really doesn't matter. If you're not with the right people, the place that you go, it really doesn't matter, right? So when we set out to kind of plant this church, Richard and I started to talk through what a church plant would look like in the West End. And before we strategized what we would do, the very first thing is, all right, who are gonna be the guys that we think could lead this thing? And so Richard was a guy that I've known for 14 years, college roommate. So I called a good friend of mine, Trip, who was in transition at the time, and said, hey, God has a plan for your life and I know what it is. Richard called his friend Mo, same way. And we just saw God kind of put together this team of guys that really balanced and complemented each other so well. 6 weeks before the church launches, I get a phone call that my older brother dies. Throughout the course of those next kind of 6 months in the life of the church, I find myself in a depression, but what takes place is that things don't stop. So the day that the church starts, my wife's grandmother dies. And I think the beauty is that, in those first few months, we really saw what God meant in his word when he said, 2 are better than 1, because if one falls down, he has another to help him up, but woe to the person that falls by himself. I mean, pastoring is a joy, but a deal breaker for me would be having to do this by myself, because it's not just impossible, but doing it by yourself prolonged feels like suicide. But it's such a joy to be able to do it with the guys that we have now. So right now in the heart of West End, we're actually meeting in the basement of this 40,000 square foot church building. And yeah, I mean, as you saw this past week, things are starting to get kind of tight. So yeah, we're just praying that God would direct us and guide us with next steps, or where it is that we need to We really want to stay here because so much of our church is built on proximity and the fact that people are so close. But yeah, so that's where we are, the basement of an old church in the middle of the hood. So, yeah.